project 2025 leader's new book. Vance's forward to dawn's early light. Trump's running mate writes that it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the classic American film Pulp Fiction, John Travolta's character, recently returned from Amsterdam, observes that Europe has the same consumer goods as America. But there it's just a little different. That's how I feel about Kevin Roberts' life. He grew up in a poor family in a corner of the country largely ignored by America's elites, but his corner was in Louisiana and mine in Ohio and Kentucky. Like me, he's a Catholic, but unlike me, he was born into it. His grandparents played an outsized role in his life, just as mine did. And now he works far from where he grew up, just a few steps from my office, in Washington, D.C. He is the president of one of Washington's most influential think tanks, and I'm a U.S. Senator. Now he has written the book you hold in your hands, which explores many of the themes I've focused on in my own work. Yet he does so profoundly, with a readable style that makes accessible its real intellectual rigor. Never before has a figure with Roberts' depth and stature within the American right tried to articulate a genuinely new future for conservatism. The Heritage Foundation isn't some random outpost on Capitol Hill. It is and has been the most influential engine of ideas for Republicans from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump. Yet it is Heritage's power and influence that makes it easy to avoid risks. Roberts could collect a nice salary, write decent books, and tell donors what they want to hear. But Roberts believes doing the same old thing could lead to the ruin of our nation. If you've read a lot of conservative books, or think you have a good sense of the conservative movement, I suspect the pages that follow will be surprising, even jarring. Roberts understands economics and supports basic free market principles, but he doesn't make an idol out of decades-old theories. He argues persuasively that the modern financial corporation was almost entirely foreign to the founders of our nation. The closest 18th-century analog to the modern Apple or Google is the British East India Company, a monstrous hybrid of public and private power that would have made its subjects completely unable to access an American sense of liberty. The idea that our founders meant to make their citizens subjects to this kind of hybrid power is ahistorical and preposterous. Yet too many modern conservatives make such an idol out of the market that they ignore this. A private company that can censor speech, influence elections, and work seamlessly with intelligence services and other federal bureaucrats deserves the scrutiny of the right, not its support. Roberts not only gets this at an instinctive level, he can articulate a political vision to engage in that scrutiny effectively. Roberts sees a conservatism that is focused on the family. In this, he borrows from the old American right that recognized, correctly in my view, that cultural norms and attitudes matter. We should encourage our kids to get married and have kids. We should teach them that marriage isn't just a contract, but a sacred, and to the extent possible, lifelong, union. We should discourage them from behaviors that threaten the stability of their families. But we should also do something else. Create the material circumstances such that having a family isn't only for the privileged. That means better jobs at all levels of the income ladder. That means protecting American industries, even if it leads to higher consumer prices in the short term. That means listening to our young people who are telling us they can't afford to buy a home or start a family, not just criticizing them for a lack of virtue. Roberts is articulating a fundamentally Christian view of culture and economics, recognizing that virtue and material progress go hand in hand. My childhood was not, by any objective measure, easy. Neither was that of Kevin Roberts. Both of us were negatively impacted by family instability, and both of us were saved by the resilience of the thick network of family, grandparents, aunts, uncles. That is often the first and most effective component of our social safety net. Both of us saw how a factory leaving a town could destroy the economic stability that provided the foundation for those families. And both of us learned to love the country that gave both of us and our families second chances, despite some bumps along the way. In these pages, Kevin is trying to figure out how we preserve as much of what worked in his own life, while correcting what didn't. To do that, we need more than a politics that simply removes the bad policies of the past. We need to rebuild. We need an offensive conservatism, not merely one that tries to prevent the left from doing things we don't like. Here's an analogy I sometimes use to articulate what the previous generation of conservatives got right and wrong. Imagine a well-maintained garden in a patch of sunlight. It has some imperfections, of course, and many weeds. The very thing that makes it attractive for the things we try to cultivate makes it attractive for the things we don't. In an effort to eliminate the bad, a well-meaning gardener treats the garden with a chemical solution. This kills many of the weeds, but it also kills many of the good things. Undeterred, the gardener keeps adding the solution. Eventually, the soil is inhospitable. In this analogy, modern liberalism is the garden is our country, and the voices discouraging the gardener were conservatives. We were right, of course. In an effort to correct problems, some real, some imagined, we made a lot of mistakes as a country in the 1960s and 1970s. But to bring the garden back to health, it is not enough to undo the mistakes of the past. The garden needs not just to stop adding a terrible solution, though it does need that. It needs to be recultivated. The old conservative movement argued if you just got government out of the way, natural forces would resolve problems. We are no longer in this situation and must take a different approach. As Kevin Roberts writes, it's fine to take a laissez-faire approach when you are in the safety of the sunshine. But when the twilight descends and you hear the wolves, you've got to circle the wagons and load the muskets. Writes that we are now all realizing that it's time to circle the but when the twilight descends and you hear the wolves, you've got to circle the wagons and load the muskets. We are now all realizing that it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon. J.D. Vance. Read J.D. Vance's violent foreword to project 2025